Okay, this just dropped. Ginny Thomas pressed Trump's chief of staff to overturn the 2020 vote. Let's do this. The message between Ms. Thomas and Mark Meadows are the first evidence that she directly advised the White House in efforts to reverse the election results. In the weeks between the 2020 presidential election and the January 6th attack on the Capitol, Virginia Thomas, the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, sent a barrage of text messages imploring President Donald J. Trump's chief of staff to take steps to overturn the vote. According to a person with knowledge of the texts, in one message sent in the days after the election, she urged the chief of staff, Mark Meadows, to release the Kraken and save us from the left taking America down, invoking a slogan popular on the right that refers to a web of conspiracy theories that Trump supporters believed would overturn the election. In another, she wrote, "I can't see Americans swallowing the obvious fraud. Just going with one more thing with no frickin' consequences." She added, "We just caved to people wanting Biden to be anointed? Many of us can't continue the GOP charade." The contents of the texts were reported earlier by the Washington Post and CBS News. They were among about 9,000 pages of documents that Mr. Meadows turned over to the Congressional Committee investigating the January 6, 2021 Capitol attack. The text detailed Mr. Meadows' interactions with Republican politicians as they planned strategies to try to keep Mr. Trump in office in the weeks before the riot. The committee obtained 29 texts between Ms. Thomas and Mr. Meadows, 28 exchanged between November 4th and November 24th, and one written on January 10th. The text messages, most of which were written by Ms. Thomas, represent the first evidence that she was directly advising the White House as it sought to overturn the election. In fact, in her efforts to keep Mr. Trump in power, Ms. Thomas effectively toggled between like-minded members of the executive and legislative branches, even as her husband, who sits at the top of the judiciary branch that is supposed to serve as a check on the other branches of government, heard election-related cases. Yeah. Fuck. Guys, I don't know, how fucking bad you understand this is. This is fucking bad. They need to impeach Clarence Thomas over this shit. Yeah, I'll whisper one to you for sure, Smash. Justice Thomas has been Trump's most stalwart defender on the court. In February 2021, he wrote a dissent after the majority declined to hear a case filed by Pennsylvania Republicans that sought to disqualify certain mail-in ballots. And this past January, he was the only justice who voted against allowing the release of records from the Trump White House related to the January 6th attack. Ms. Thomas has actively opposed the January 6th committee and its work, co-signing a letter in December calling for House Republicans to expel Representatives Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger from their conference for joining the committee. Ms. Thomas and her co-authors said the investigation brings disrespect to our country's rule of law and legal harassment to private citizens who have done nothing wrong, adding that there would begin a nationwide movement to add citizens' voices to this effort. Many of Mrs. Thomas's post-election texts are rambling with little attention to punctuation, and they run the gamut. She calls November 3rd, Election Day, a heist, and repeats debunked conspiracy theories, including one pushed by QAnon that falsely alleged that voter fraud had been discovered in Arizona on secretly watermarked ballots. Really? The text shows she was communicating not only with Mr. Meadows, but also with Connie Hare, the chief of staff to Louis Gohmert, the Texas Republican congressman who sued Vice President Mike Pence to force him to certify Mr. Trump as the victor of the 2020 election. He lost that, by the way. Yes, I need to hydrate. Give me a moment. Let me grab water. Because they're fucking psychopaths. Like, people keep saying, like, they try to say that people who dislike Trump have Trump derangement syndrome, but literally it's the exact opposite. They are the ones with Trump derangement syndrome. They are the ones who are deranged because of Trump. Like, give me a fucking break, right? Give me a freaking break, Scott. In one exchange, oh wait, hold on. Where was I at? Damn, did my shit scroll way down? Oh yeah. The text shows she was communicating not only with, okay, I read that. The text traffic also suggests that Ms. Thomas was in contact with Jared Kushner, the former president's son-in-law and advisor. Sidney Powell, the lawyer advising Trump's campaign team, known for unleashing wild theories about voting fraud, comes up repeatedly. On November 13th, for instance, Mr. Trump included Ms. Powell in a tweeted list of his team players. That same day, Ms. Thomas urged Mr. Meadows to support Ms. Powell and said she had also reached out to Jared to do the same. Just forwarded to your Gmail an email I sent Jared this AM, she wrote. Sidney Powell and improved coordination now will help the cavalry come and fraud exposed and America saved. These are so poorly worded fucking text messages. It's hard to read them because they don't read like fucking like normal English. When some of the president's other lawyers began distancing themselves from Ms. Powell, Ms. Thomas warned Mr. Meadows not to cave to the elites. In one exchange, right after the election, she tells Mr. Meadows that he needs to listen to Steve Pieczenik, a one-time State Department consultant who has appeared on Alex Jones' InfoWars to claim, among other things, that the Sandy Hook school massacre was a false flag operation. Do we now understand the caliber of the people we're dealing with here? Do we get it? And we let... All I'm saying is guilt by association, kind of, but we let Clarence Thomas onto the bench when he surrounds himself with people like her. The level of fucking freaked out that makes me is beyond fucking words, really. It's to the... I'm getting brain bubbles, guys. I can't fucking believe this shit. .22 cal. Say less. She also quoted language circulating on pro-Trump sites that said Biden crime family and ballot fraud co-conspirators, elected officials, bureaucrats, social media censorship mongers, fake stream media reporters, etc., are being arrested and detained for ballot fraud right now and over coming days, and will be living in barges off Gitmo to face military tribunals for sedition. She added, I hope this is true. Ms. Thomas and Mr. Meadows have been like-minded associates for years, and she bestowed an award on him at a 2019 gathering of conservatives. While Ms. Thomas already had access to the president, White House aides said her influence increased after Mr. Trump named Mr. Meadows chief of staff in March 2020. Mr. Meadows is no longer cooperating with the committee. A lawyer for Mr. Meadows, George J. Terwilliger III, George J. That name's a mouthful, did not immediately respond to requests for comment, nor did Ms. Thomas or the Supreme Court. Mr. Terwilliger has argued that Mr. Meadows cooperated as much as he could without violating Mr. Trump's assertions of executive privilege, and Mr. Meadows has filed suit against the panel to seek a court ruling to determine the validity of those assertions of executive privilege. Others challenging the committee's subpoenas in court include John Eastman, a conservative lawyer and former clerk to Justice Thomas, who wrote a memo arguing that Mr. Pence had the power to reject Electoral College votes for President Biden. Both cases could end up before the Supreme Court, which means that Clarence Thomas should not be able to be a factor. George J. Wilker III sounds like an outburst my grandfather would make. Yeah, George J. Wilker III, damn it! Let's see. A conservative lawyer and for okay. A New York Times investigation published in February highlighted Ms. Thomas's post-election activities, including her role on the board of CNP Action, a conservative group that worked to advance efforts to overturn the election, even as she was texting Mr. Meadows. In one document, it instructed members to pressure Republican lawmakers into challenging the results and appointing alternate slates of electors. Demand that they not abandon their constitutional responsibilities during a time such as this. The constitutional responsibilities were to certify the election. That's what it was. God damn, this article's long. We'll get through it together. In recently published remarks, Ms. Thomas downplayed her role at the group, but also said she had attended the January 6th rally at the Ellipse in Washington. She added that she was disappointed and frustrated that there was violence that happened following a peaceful gathering. She also said she played no role with those who were planning and leading the January 6th events, but those comments are undercut by her communications with Mr. Meadows, who was deeply involved in the planning of the January 6th protests. In her one text to Mr. Meadows after the attack that the committee was able to obtain, she only briefly mentions what took place, and only after reiterating one of its animating ideas that Mr. Pence had betrayed Mr. Trump's movement. She writes of feeling that we are living in what feels like the end of America. Most of us are disgusted with the VP and are in listening mode to see where to fight with our teams. Those who attacked the Capitol are not representative of our great teams or of our great teams of patriots for DJT. Amazing times, the end of liberty. Wow, snarky as fuck. Ms. Thomas has been a longtime political activist on the far right, and she and her husband have been frequent presence at partisan political conferences. That has long led to calls for Mr. Thomas to recuse himself from cases in which his wife has an interest, but he has rejected such suggestions. He once said his wife worked 24/7 every day in defense of liberty, adding, we are equally yoked and we love being with each other because we love the same things. Stephen Gillers, a law professor and judicial ethics expert at New York University, said that while Ms. Thomas is free to exercise her First Amendment rights, her text crossed a line. The consequences of what she's done is that I don't think that Clarence Thomas can sit on any case involving even remotely the conduct of the election, the vote of Congress on January 6th, or any cases involving the January 6th committee's attempts to get information, including the committee's efforts to get Eastman's emails, he said. He must recuse himself and should have recused himself in the cases that have been heard up until now. All right, guys. Chromebook sucked, wasn't working for you? Sorry to hear that. Hearing they could take away Roe v. Wade made me feel literally sick. Like, I can't believe this is happening in 2022.